Everybody, welcome to our latest edition of Abbey Research Reads. I'm Dr. Erin, and for this review, I am talking to you about David Treuer's tomb of a book. It's heavy, emotionally and physically. The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the present. David is an anthropologist and Ojibwe from the Leech Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota. And y'all, I'm sure you're tired of hearing both Dr. Kristen and I say that this book changed my life. But we love books, we love learning, and we very often read books that change our lives. If you've seen any of my other reviews about books written by Native and Indigenous folks, you know, or maybe some of our other videos, that I grew up in southwestern Colorado. And so had a very different understanding of Native and Indigenous people, a more comprehensive one than Dr. Kristen did, given where she was raised and the educational system that she was raised in. I learned a lot about the history of Native and Indigenous folks. I took a class on U.S. history that talked about colonization of Indigenous land by United States settlers, without calling it colonization, but it was 1998. It's probably, if it still exists, called colonization now. I took a Native Lit class in college, you know, all of these things that us white folks can say to prove that we've done some learning. And even though I had this level of knowledge that was higher than statistically what we know most Americans, this book held so much more information than I had ever considered in terms of the expansive, horrific, deeply disturbing history of the way settlers onto this land, colonizers of Indigenous land, what became the United States eventually, treated Native and Indigenous folks. And the starting thesis of David's book really is that Native history after 1890, which is the date of the massacre at Wounded Knee, is largely written out of American history, out of US history. We look at the massacre at Wounded Knee as the end of Native civilization. And that could not be farther from the truth. But it's a convenient way of, you know, the people who write the history are the people who maintain the power systems, right? And so the Hamilton line, who lives, who dies, who tells your story? White folks have been telling the story of America predominantly in a way that has maintained the power structure, where white people are predominantly in power still. And we have lots of Black and Brown and Indigenous folks that have written a lot about alternative histories, about different lenses with which to see that history. And we're getting to this zenith of fantastic publications that are criticizing the lenses that we're all raised with and showing us a different way to think about history in the world. And that's what The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee does. And it goes from 1890 to the present. It talks about digital lives of Native and Indigenous folks. And, you know, the beauty of a lot of these social media platforms and media platforms, full stop, is that we have a lot of active and vocal Native and Indigenous and Indian peoples on Twitter and on Snapchat and on Instagram and on Facebook, sharing their stories and advocating for what they believe in. We also have some really fantastic podcasts out there, including All My Relations, which is one of my favorites, but also This Land by Rebecca Nagel, which goes into a murder case that goes to the Supreme Court that has profound implications for the ownership of Cherokee land in what is now present day Oklahoma. So we have a lot more access. There's a lot more equitable access to disseminating information, which is really, really important. And it gives us this chance to be exposed to voices that should be heard and should force us to restructure our historical lens, especially in the United States and especially as it relates to Indigenous histories and peoples and cultures, which is a really expansive group of human beings. And that's another thing that this book does really well. It's very specific about David Treuer's experience as an Ojibwe, as his life and lived experiences growing up and living on the Leech Lake Reservation. But he also speaks to Indian people from all around the country. And what I love about his training as an anthropologist, and as an anthropologist myself, is the conversations that he has with people and the way he is reflective of his own identity and learns about their identities through these conversations and through what we in the business call ethnographic research. But it's an exceptional empathy builder. It is a lot of heavy lifting emotionally. If this is not an aspect of US history that you have previously grappled with, or an aspect of your whiteness or your white privilege that you have thought much about, this I would start with fiction. First, I would start with There or The Lone Ranger by Tommy Orange, which you'll find a review on this channel, or The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven by Sherman Alexie. There's a lot of great Native and Indigenous fiction out there that might be an easier place to start. But if you've done some of that work, but you want to learn more about this period of history from 1890 to where we are now in 2021, this book is it, y'all. So find it at your local bookshop or digitally or in audio format, if that is your preference. And give it the time and space that it deserves and it has earned. Comes highly recommended from the good doctors here at Abbey Research. And that's my review for today. We'll see you guys next time.